They didn't remove him because he failed. They removed him because he never did. By the end of the war in Europe, one American general had crushed every enemy placed in front of him, embarrassed allies, terrified enemies, and built a reputation so powerful that Washington itself began to feel threatened. His soldiers worshipped him, his enemies feared him, and his superiors quietly started asking a dangerous question. What do you do with a man who keeps winning but refuses to obey the rules of politics? George S. Patton was not relieved of command for incompetence, recklessness, or defeat. He was removed because victory, in his hands, became a liability. Every advance he made exposed the hesitation of others. Every success he achieved made the men above him look slower, weaker, and unnecessary. By 1945, Patton had done what generals are supposed to do. He won battles. But war is not only fought on maps and fields, it is fought in offices, egos, alliances, and fears. And Patton was about to lose a war he never realized he was fighting. When American troops broke out of Normandy, it was Patton who turned chaos into momentum. He moved faster than orders, struck harder than plans allowed, and ignored limits that existed only on paper. While other commanders waited for permission, Patton advanced. While others worried about supply lines and politics, Patton worried about one thing: destroying the enemy before they could breathe. The results were undeniable. German units collapsed under his pressure, entire fronts unraveled, and towns fell so quickly that maps became outdated overnight. His Third Army became a machine built for speed and violence, and it worked. Too well. That success made Patton dangerous, not to the Germans, but to his own side. Because every mile he gained raised an uncomfortable truth. If Patton could do this, why hadn't others? And worse, what if he didn't stop when the war officially ended? This is the story of how a general who never lost a battle became a problem his own leadership could no longer control, and why winning, in the end, cost George S. Patton his command. By late 1944, Patton's reputation had grown beyond his rank. German officers knew his name before they knew his unit designation. American soldiers spoke about him with a mix of pride and fear, because serving under Patton meant surviving by moving faster than death. To Patton, hesitation was betrayal, and caution was just another word for cowardice. But while his army surged forward, tension followed him like a shadow. Patton did not speak like other generals, and he did not think like politicians. He openly mocked Allied commanders, dismissed diplomatic sensitivities, and treated war as a contest meant to be won decisively, not managed carefully. Every time he spoke, he made enemies who wore the same uniform as him. The first cracks appeared long before his removal. Incidents that would have ended other careers were quietly buried because Patton kept delivering victories. His temper, his language, and his refusal to soften his views were tolerated only because the battlefield kept justifying him. As long as he won, leadership looked the other way. Then came the problem no one could ignore: Patton's speed. His advances threatened carefully negotiated agreements between the Allies. He reached objectives faster than planners expected, crossing lines that existed for political reasons rather than military ones. In doing so, he exposed a truth Washington did not want public. The war could end very differently if men like Patton were allowed to decide its shape. Patton did not see limits the same way others did. To him, the enemy was still alive, still dangerous, and still needed to be destroyed completely. He spoke openly about pushing east, about confronting the Soviets if necessary, about finishing wars instead of freezing them. Those words landed like explosives in rooms filled with diplomats and strategists. Behind closed doors, concern turned into calculation. Patton was no longer evaluated only as a commander, but as a variable. A brilliant one, but unpredictable, uncontrollable, and increasingly inconvenient. Winning battles was no longer enough to protect him. By the time the guns began to quiet, Patton stood isolated, not because he failed, but because he refused to slow down when others wanted peace on their terms. The war he was fighting still demanded aggression. The war his superiors were fighting demanded obedience, and that contradiction was about to end him. As the fighting wound down, the battlefield stopped protecting Patton. With fewer victories to distract from his behavior, every past offense resurfaced at once. Reports that had once been ignored were reread with colder eyes. Men who had tolerated him in wartime began judging him by peacetime rules. Patton made it worse by refusing to change. He spoke openly about former Nazis being useful administrators against communism. He criticized the denazification process as naive and dangerous. In a political climate shifting rapidly towards the next global confrontation, his words sounded radioactive. Allied leadership was no longer unified by survival. The enemy had been beaten, and now alliances needed to be preserved. Patton's blunt honesty threatened carefully balanced narratives about victory, morality, and post-war order. He wasn't right, but he was impossible to control.
Behind the scenes, his superiors debated him like a liability report. No one questioned his effectiveness in combat. The concern was influence, what he might say next, who might listen, and how much damage it could cause. A general who spoke too freely was more dangerous now than one who lost battles. Patton sensed the shift, but misread its danger. He believed results still mattered more than politics. He thought his record would shield him the way it always had. For the first time in his career, it didn't. The final decision didn't come from a single outburst. It came from accumulation, too many remarks, too much independence, too little restraint. Leadership concluded that Patton could no longer be trusted to represent American authority in the new world taking shape. He wasn't removed for losing control of troops. He was removed for refusing to surrender his voice. When the order came, it was quiet and clinical. No court-martial, no public disgrace, no explanation worthy of his service. He was reassigned, sidelined, stripped of meaningful command. A man built for war was handed a desk in a war that had moved on without him. Patton took it as a personal humiliation. To him, it wasn't just removal, it was betrayal. He had won every battle he was given, and yet that victory had made him expendable. The war had changed. Patton had not. And in that moment, the greatest weapon America had fielded was deemed too dangerous to keep loaded. The removal broke something in Patton that no enemy ever had. He returned to the United States outwardly decorated, inwardly hollowed. The man who had thrived on motion, command, and pressure was suddenly irrelevant. For someone whose identity was forged entirely in war, peace felt like exile. Publicly, he remained composed, even proud. Privately, he spoke of betrayal and misunderstanding with bitterness that never softened. He knew history would remember his victories, but he feared it would forget the cost of silencing him. The silence around his removal heard more than any criticism ever had. Then came the accident, sudden, mundane, almost insulting in its simplicity. No battlefield, no hero's death, just twisted metal on a quiet road. Within days, George S. Patton was gone. The man who survived North Africa, Sicily, and the dash across Europe did not survive peace. Only afterward did the questions begin. Had the Allies removed a liability or discarded a warning? Patton had seen the next conflict coming before the ink on surrender papers dried. He understood that yesterday's enemy could become tomorrow's necessity. History remains divided because the truth is uncomfortable. Patton was brilliant, prophetic, reckless, and uncontrollable all at once. He won every battle he was allowed to fight, and when there were no battles left, the system that used him no longer knew what to do with him. In the end, Patton wasn't removed because he failed. He was removed because he succeeded too loudly, too independently, and too honestly. Victory made him powerful, and power made him dangerous. That is why the general whom never lost was the one they chose to silence.